Generation Z is one of the least religious generations that we have ever seen. On top of this, they're dealing with a lot of different things. Anxiety and depression is at an all-time high, and social media seems to be a lot of the cause of this. There have been so many traumatic events as well through the life of the Gen Z population.
Coronavirus. The World Health Organization says the risk of the virus expanding worldwide is now classified as very high.
The generations go like this: the silent generation, the baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and then Gen Z. Generation Z is made up of high school and college age students that are really dealing with a lot of different things. In fact, this generation claims that 91% of them have dealt with the effects of anxiety and depression in their lives. So how do we reach this generation that is so far away from God at the moment? They hate religion and are dealing with anxiety and depression at a rate that no one has ever seen before. We need to approach Gen Z where they are, interact with them in the world that they live in. This includes using audio and video and social media as a medium in order to understand them better. Now, we follow The Chosen here on this channel, and one of the amazing things that they've done in the last few months is come out with this documentary called Unfiltered. The whole point of this documentary is to reach Generation Z. Many of them are on the brink of just forgetting about God altogether or leaving the church that they grew up in. So this is a very monumental point in their life. But The Chosen wanted to understand Generation Z a little bit better. We've already seen different initiatives from them this year that have caused some controversy, yes, but have also reached a lot of the Gen Z population. So what was this documentary? The Chosen took 9 strangers from Generation Z and put them in a room to binge the first season of The Chosen. The idea here is to get as much data as possible to understand how people would interact with this show if they've seen it for the first time. Now, I think when they first premiered this documentary, Dallas Jenkins did a great job about setting it up and explaining what this documentary was supposed to be. Because truthfully, you go into a Chosen project wanting to hear the Chosen's voice. And in this case, that just didn't happen.
I know that I can count on you to be hospitable. And they come from different backgrounds, and they say things that you might not necessarily agree with. We've had some of the most aggressive and insulting comments one could see on the internet, directed towards me, directed towards the show, and we don't care. We're going to treat our guests a little differently. We're not going to tolerate people who are going to use social media comment sections as the place to litigate their own views or their own disagreements with people who they don't know.
99% or more of this film is not the Chosen talking. There's no one from the team that's explaining things. There's no one from the show that comes and talks to them except for Jonathan Rumi at one point. And so much of this documentary is just these 9 strangers talking about the show and how it's impacted them, and then them diving into their own stories and their own journey within Christianity.
The way Jesus entered, unreal.
I mean,
Was he gonna do less?
And so as we watch this documentary, you have to keep in mind that most of these Gen Zers are not Christian. They say so themselves.
Have I watched Christian content? No.
I think I'm always a little wary of Christian media. It's very white.
It's been more preachy.
Force-feeding them a religion.
If I see or come across a Christian movie, I'll just turn it off because I don't want to be like spoon-fed propaganda, to be honest, and I just can't relate to it at all.
And so a lot of them are in this place of searching, or they're in a place of complete denial of Christianity altogether, the true Christianity that we know. And so as they talk about the things of Christ, they're doing so not from a place of Christian authority. And so this really reminded me of a verse in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 1:18 says this: "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligent of the intelligent I will frustrate." So to many of the participants of this documentary, this may have seemed foolish, especially at first before diving into what this show was all about. At first, they kind of make fun a little bit of this show and kind of poke fun of the other things that we see within Christian media.
There's a baptismal pool behind the curtain for any converts.
But I think that this is still an amazing documentary because it allows us to have an unfiltered look into the minds of Gen Z and see where they're coming from. Why don't they like Christianity? Or why have they never participated in the first place? Here are some of my favorite moments as they interact with the show for the first time.
I'd say the majority of like Christian faith-based stuff is tends to be cheesy.
And it seems like they don't put a lot of effort.
I feel like I'm more spiritual than religious. I feel like I had a really,
Yeah.
Ben and I were talking about this, just a traumatic experience with the church. And so I'm like, I hope this is, I mean, it seems cool, but I feel like very wary about entering into that domain again.
Okay. All right.
Wow.
That was intense.
That was so good.
See, I'm liking the side that they're showing that, you know, the rich side of things and the poor side of things. And you can really, like, you know, really feel for both sides and see where they're coming from in that sense. Like,
I feel bad for the tax man. Nobody ever talks about how desperate you can get when you're trying to save yourself or someone you care about.
when you're backed into a corner.
But pretty quickly into this documentary, we begin to see a lot of the trauma that these Gen Zers have gone through in their lives, from being part of a cult to experiencing abuse in church to dealing with their identity and having been shunned because of it. There's a lot of different things that are happening within the lives of these students that is really, really hard. First, we see Benjamin. Benjamin was part of a cult, like a literal cult, where he was threatened to be abused, and they were teaching him all of these different things that obviously he didn't agree with.
I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, a month after my parents joined a new church. And that ended up being my cult. It's probably like my first vivid memory of the pastor who founded the church was him coming over to us and going, oh, you want to see attitude? I'll take you in the woods outside my house after midnight and show you attitude. And I was like 8 years old. I was like, what did I do? Like, I'm just sitting here. He seems to have it kind of made. I mean, the church makes all his money for him. He's got the nicest car in the church, nicest house. Like, they built an entire house for him at no charge. And it was like a nice house. That was the one he threatened to beat me outside of.
Then eventually he was able to leave this cult, but he still had a lot of broken ideas about what religion was.
We had this meeting, literally just money pressuring all the guys. Like, we weren't making enough money, and like, it was constantly a thing every week. Like, as soon as I got to the point where I was like considered old enough to like be a man or whatever. So we were having this meeting, and it's like the senior, you know, the pastor who like founded the church and everything, and he's like, look, you guys said that we would move here and like you would take care of me, you would make sure me and my wife were, you know, protected, and basically like putting his financial problems on us. I feel like that night I could never go like rejoin the things of the church, at least not that church.
And then we get to one of the most heartbreaking pieces of this documentary. Imani begins to share how she was abused in church, how people took advantage of her sexually, and even when it was found out, nothing really happened.
Around 10 years old, my mom started going to church really often. I just remember the pastor always saying, like, if you come up and get prayed for, you'll get a house, you'll get a new car. And to me, it just felt so manipulative, and I just could not get jiggy with it. Life kept trying to just throw me down like this well. I started getting sick. I had epilepsy, and I went back up to Jersey with my mom to figure out, like, what the problem was and what the solution actually could be. And it was around this time when we started going back to the church we went to when I was younger in Jersey. Adults in the church and some kids my age who I don't know why, but maybe I was too nice or something. They started like sexually abusing me in the church. I thought this was like punishment for like me being bad or like me acting out. So that's kind of what I heard. Like, if you were bad, then like Jesus or like God will punish you. And I just remember one experience of one of like the elders in the church walking in one of the church bathrooms and like seeing it happen. And I thought it would like stop after that, and it didn't. And I think I still have a lot of resentment now because I trusted them, and I feel like they took a lot of my innocence and my like childhood away, so that really hurt. And I think that's why I'm like kind of terrified of going back to church, because I felt like no one protected me.
This is awful and terrifying. To think that the place that you thought would be the most safe, the place where you would find comfort and healing from Christ, would be the place that you'd be abused. Honestly, it breaks my heart. And I just pray that Amani can find healing, that she can find redemption, and that she can find forgiveness to jump back into church culture, church community, because I truly believe that's where we thrive the best. And it's where Christ grows us the most. And not only do we see how the trauma has affected Generation Z in the way that they interact with religion and Christianity, but we also see these non-Christian ideas that have bled their way into cultural thinking and changing the way that they perceive truth. And this brings me to what I thought was going to be the most contentious point of this documentary, and that would be Josephine. Now, Josephine openly admits in this documentary that she is queer, that she is part of the LGBTQ community.
I sort of had to fall away from the church when I was in college and discovered my queerness. It was something for a long time that everyone had told me was a huge sin, and these were dirty, dirty people, and something was wrong with you if you felt this way. I would like be in my bed and like crying out, like, tell me what is the truth, and am I an awful person? And I just couldn't hear God's voice about it. And so it was so torturous to have this thing in me that I couldn't figure out.
Now, a lot of people, I was really worried, would kind of see this in the wrong way. Just as we talked about at the very beginning of this video, The Chosen is not speaking through this documentary. It's just the unfiltered opinions of Generation Z. And of course, the LGBTQ community is huge in Generation Z, in the way that they interact, in the way that they see things, in the way that culture is formed, has gone through that community a lot. And so while I'm certain that Josephine is not the only one that's part of this community or advocates for this community within the group of Gen Z people, she is the only one that admits to being a part of it. As Christians, this is one of the most prominent things that's happening in today's world that we fight back on, because the scripture clearly states what is true about marriage and what is true about what relationships should be. One man, one woman in marriage. And a lot of this has been distorted over the last 30 plus years. And it's become a really contentious point within Christianity because it's so upfront. It's not a hidden sin, right? At this point, it's become pride. Now, Josephine grew up religious, and she had a lot of experiences in that. But now she's kind of turned away from the faith and has let this community be more of her identity than Christ. This is the reality of the situation. Generation Z is more affected by the LGBTQ community than any other generation before. It's become a bigger deal in the last 10 to 15 years than it ever has been before. And the fight for it to be more accepted and more in culture and more widely adopted has been huge. But we also see the effects that hyper-inclusivity has on this generation as a whole. It's not just about identity or sexual identity. It's not just about your career or your skin tone. It's also about religion and how all religions could lead to the same place and how we should accept all religions as well. Remember what Jesus said in John chapter 14. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. He didn't say no one comes to the Father except through whatever you want to. He didn't say that everyone can come to the Father. There is a way that God created this world, and there is an exclusivity element to what he's asking us to do. Not everyone will choose the way of life, but everyone is invited. And this brings us to what I think is the most important moment in this documentary. It's taking all that we've heard from Generation Z and then going into how can we communicate with them about it, using Jonathan Rumi as the mediator here. Near the end of the documentary, the participants get to go to the Goshen set, they meet Jonathan Rumi, and at the very end, they get to sit down and have a conversation with him. Of course, they're excited to meet him and talk to him since they've been watching his show this whole time. I was very impressed with how Jonathan Rumi spoke with the participants and how they all listened to him and understood a little bit of what he was saying. Now, there was one moment in particular with Adrian, where Jonathan Rumi had a very intense conversation.
Growing up, I didn't really have much faith. I did a lot of research on Buddhism, Egyptian culture. So I ended up choosing to believe in many gods. I refuse to believe that there's just one higher power out there. I like to believe that everybody deserves a chance to believe in anything that they want to.
You can hear it here in Adrian, that he feels like this universalistic approach to religion is the way that we should go, that we should look at the Egyptian gods and the Greek gods, and sure, the Christian gods too. But I think that there's a bunch of them, or something like that. But you can see here as Jonathan pushes even more.
That being said, you know, it took a while, and I'm constantly saying, you know, God is good, you know, God bless, blessings.
Then why don't you, can I ask you a question? Why don't you say the gods are good?
I'm back and forth with it.
Back and forth meaning the phrase or the idea of one versus many?
I would say back and forth with one versus many, if I am to be honest. And, you know, watching The Chosen helped me, you know, open up a little bit more and get a better understanding of who Jesus was.
And then going beyond the show, going beyond this documentary even, beyond the cameras and the lights, Jonathan approaches Adrian and says that God is calling you.
God is calling you. Yeah. He wants to know you on a deeper level. And so that tug that you're feeling, that's Christ trying to get to know you. That's what that is. So you've got nothing to lose to explore. And as you get closer and closer, you'll know what's true. But I think he's calling you. And I just felt I should share that with you.
Thank you.
I'll pray for you. You guys have been so awesome, so open and vulnerable, and so...
This moment to me was the most important moment of the film, because this is what Generation Z needs to hear. They need to hear that God is real, that he is calling them, and that he has a plan for them. That the good news is that they are saved if they just come to him. And so many of them are opposed to this idea. They're so riddled with anxiety and depression and anger that they don't hear the gospel. So as Christians, we need to help them to experience the gospel, help to love on them, to show them the love of Christ, to show them how good Christ is. This is one of the major things that I think we're missing in this next generation, because a lot of us have just written them off as people who are just depressed all the time, or anxious all the time, or dealing with social media, addicted to their phones, and hate religion. But the truth is that they are people just like us, and they need Jesus just like we do.
The interaction between me and Jonathan definitely felt like Jesus or God or gods was speaking to me through him.
Come here, brother.
Yes, he plays a character, but he does it in a sense where you can tell that that character is part of him. And so to have him acknowledge me for, you know, my efforts, and he doesn't even know me like that, that was a surreal moment. And that's why, you know, I couldn't hold back the tears. I couldn't, I let them flow. And it was one of those moments that I will truthfully cherish for the rest of my life.
If you want to support more content like this, the best way to support us is through our Patreon. That's patreon.com/thesnipelife. You get a lot of early content and some amazing stuff over there. We've got some huge updates coming for me and Vanessa personally, and we're going to be sharing those on the Patreon first, so make sure you keep an eye out over there. Anyway, keep living the snipe life. I hope you like this video, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.